for your heart here, ready to give you another tutorial. Today we are going to grab a longsword OBJ file that was given to me by LazyTrain, and we are going to go ahead and we're going to take that into Blender and export it out as an MDB for Neverwinter Nights 2 for the modules that you play. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Here we go. So we're going to start this video off by just kind of going through it. I'm going to be pretty quick with it, and it's going to be a quick video since it doesn't use armatures. We don't have to worry about waiting when doing items and stuff like this, and I'll explain that more in depth when we get into it. But in the future, I am going to get the Camtasia software, so you should be able to see my keystrokes as I'm pressing them. For those that kind of want to learn what shortcuts I'm pressing to help me increase or speed up my workflow. But for now, we'll just stick with this recording screen software, and let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to open up Blender here. Just fire up Blender. Mine takes a second to start because of RAM issues. My computer's fairly old at this point. I want to say like 3-4 years old. Okay, so let's go ahead and let it fire up. There we go. Blender 2.79 is what we're using. I think in the past I said 2.78C, so I've been incorrect. Someone pointed it out to me, and I'm thankful for that. So let's go ahead and import the first thing that we need for creating the weapon. Now, first you have to choose what weapon you're going to replace. Simply being is because I use, as always, with everything that I make for Neverwinter Nights 2, a reference model. In this case, I went to the data files and I pulled out the W for weapon _ L-sword, longsword 01 for its slot, and A. Now they have suffixes. You have A, B, and C. Usually A carries, from my understanding, it carries the blade. B carries the hilt, and C carries the other part. And I feel pretty stupid for not knowing that at the moment. But either way, I could be wrong. So if I'm wrong, we're going to go ahead and make that correction right now. Like I said, this video is kind of winged and put together at the last minute, simply because I've been having a, I've been lazy, pretty much. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to go ahead and import that Neverwinter Nights 2 MDB that I pulled from my data files. So I'm going to go to Import Neverwinter Nights 2, and I'm going to go ahead and find that file, which should be on my desktop. And I have it here under Working Files, and I put it under Sword Tutorial, and it's this one right here. Now when I click it, I also want to make sure I click Remove Doubles. We don't need to click MDB as a head model because that's only for heads, and we don't need to find an armature because we know that this doesn't come with a skeleton for it to be rigged. It's a simple standalone item that when equipped finds its way to a bone via the engine itself. So let's go ahead and double click that, and we brought it in. Now as you can see, we have the sword here. And it also imports these HP files. I'm going to go ahead and turn those off. Normally what I used to do is I used to go ahead and delete them, but for the sake of keeping everything intact, because there are some things that sometimes the engine has or the file has that we don't quite understand. And from what I didn't quite understand when I started out. And for one reason or another, I learned it's better to just leave them there than to delete them in general, because they're there for a reason. Someone didn't just make them there as a spoof or just to make things difficult. So in this case, as you can see, these two files actually have materials in them, and in the materials they have this little thing called HP1, door face 001, and door face. So for the purpose of just not dealing and explaining all that, just kind of making this tutorial quick, we're just going to turn those off, leave them there. Now, I mentioned injection files before in my previous tutorials with creating a helmet and creating a hair. I want to say those are similar, so you just don't want to touch them, just want to leave them there. Even if you render them with them off, they're still there and the engine can read their purpose. Now, what I did here is I went ahead and I imported the actual blade. One thing that I forgot to do was pull up the other files anyway. Longsword 01 _ B and _ C. Because I realize now that I'm actually going to need those files because I need them for referencing my very first model. After I reference my first model, I no longer need them and I can delete them. So I'm going to go back into my data files. I'm going to open up the Neverwinter Nights 2 models zip. Let that open up, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that file, those two files that I'm missing, which would be the hilt and the one part that I failed to name earlier. So longsword 01 is what we're looking for, but we're also looking for the B and the C models. and I'll go ahead and bring them in by copying them there, just dragging and dropping, closing that out, go ahead and close that out, and I'm going to import these two. Now I can't just drag and drop them, obviously I got to do them one at a time. So File, Import, Neverwinter Nights 2. If you've already imported an NDB file, everything should still be saved here, so you don't have to worry about clicking that anymore. And we're going to go back into our recent file, sword tutorial, and we're going to import the _B model. And as you can see, we now have, I'm going to hold Alt and use the left mouse click to rotate. We now have our next part for the weapon here. I'm actually going to turn the camera by hitting number pad 3, and it's going to put it on a side view. I believe that's a right orthographic view. And that's what we want to work in. The swords have to be in this mode, whereas before, if you've noticed, when we worked with helmets and hairs, we're using the back ortho view. In this case, when doing weapons, we're using the right ortho view. Okay, so now we have these two parts. We're going to need one more part, and I believe that's the actual handle itself. And so I'm going to go to Import Neverwinter Nights 2, and I believe that would be _C. So go to double click that, bring that in. Now, as you can see, these didn't come with the HP1, HP2 files, which is fine, which is actually really good. Now, they all use the same texture, because if we go into the texture for each one, they use the same Blade 01. Actually, they don't. These two use the same, but that doesn't matter because we're only taking this in for reference. We don't need to find the textures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and right-click on one part, hold Shift, right-click on the next, and then keep holding Shift and right-click on the third. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control J, and what that's going to do, it's going to combine everything into one object file. And we have the mesh within. We have the 3 meshes here within that one object file. Okay, because as you know, we have objects, then we have meshes within objects. All right. So now that that's done, hit Tab. We can see it's all there. Now this is not important. We just need it as a reference. Think of it as just something where we can lay as a base outline for putting our own weapon on top of. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to import the OBJ file that Lazy Train gave me that I could use for this tutorial. Special thanks to him. So I have them here in these two folders called Origin Models Sword and Origin Models Sahart. I think he meant to spell sheath. I could be wrong. Or maybe I'm just not reading that right. But we'll just roll with it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that sword file. It should be in OBJ. So File, Import, Wavefront OBJ. Here we go. Had a little brain fart there. Okay, I'm not going to touch all this because this takes a little bit more explaining to do. So I'm just going to kind of do it as if you didn't know what this meant, and then we're going to import it anyway and then fix it from there. This is pretty much just saying how do you want to import it and what direction do you want the model to be facing. Now, if you're not familiar with how Z-Space works and how the XYZ vertices work and the directions, let's just not get into that because that's a whole tutorial in itself. So I'm going to go to the Models S-Sword. Okay, because we'll do the sheath second if we have time. And I'm going to go ahead and pull Sword OBJ. Okay, obviously the weapon is really big. Neverwinter Nights 2 models are fairly small. If you've ever seen a Skyrim model being imported into Blender, it's about 10 times bigger than a Neverwinter Nights 2 model. So this is kind of similar to what a Skyrim model imports its size at. Now, as we can see here, we have it imported and it looks like it's only one item, which is good. It's intact, which means we don't have to worry about doing multiple textures, multiple UV map stitching, and all of that beautiful stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and click Tab. I'm going to click on this first, right click, and hit Tab, okay? And that puts me into edit mode. Now when I hit Tab, I'm going to go ahead and press S for scale. I'm going to scale it down. But if we notice, it's scaling down to the center of the actual object, not to the center of the actual scene. So in fact, I want to go ahead and hit Control Z, undo that. I want to make sure that when I import these items, I'm always scaling in object mode because you want to scale it to the center, and we'll go ahead and make our edits from there. The reason why we're going to do that is just because sometimes going off just a little bit, especially for a weapon, if it's not centered properly, if it's not scaled properly, it goes a long way in the model, which means it would really show that error would really show up in the model because the model has to fit snug to the hand. And the way this is spaced, the way this is positioned in here in Blender is exactly how the game engine reads it. So if I were to move it off to the right here, it would actually, when I render it in game, it would be off the hand. It would still float, but it'd just be off the hand, so it'd be very weird. Then again, if you try that and export it and see what it looks like, you may come across some ideas of your own to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I do want to create something that uses that sort of that sort of mechanic and get creative. You know, Neverwinter Nights 2 is all about creativity anyway. At least now it is, considering that a lot of stuff's being modded for it. Okay, so I'm going to hit S for scale, and we're now scaling in object mode, not edit mode. So if you're seeing this, where everything within is yellow and highlighted, and you look down here, you're in edit mode. So click tab if you are, and get out of that. Okay, go ahead and click S, scale, and we're going to bring it in, and then just zoom in a little more. Let's go ahead and hit Alt Shift, left click, pan. Okay, and let's go to hit scale again and bring it in just a little bit more. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. Hit scale again after you zoom in. Scale it just a little more. Go ahead and pan over. Let's go ahead and zoom in with the middle mouse. Okay, and let's go ahead and start scaling it a little more. All right. Now, obviously, we're lower than the weapon where we want to be, so I'm going to go ahead and grab it from the Z axis, and I'm going to go ahead and pick it up. Now, I want to kind of get it within the same area of space that the actual model is in. How you want to do that yourself, or however you want to exaggerate that, is fairly up to you. Just know that the hand itself reaches within these 4 boxes. So if you look here, you have these big boxes, little boxes within. I try to generally, well, put it this way. Do you see where this hilt is at? That's pretty much where the hand's going to grab. It's going to grab in between here on the old model. I'm looking at the old model. Here and here. The hand will be between here, okay? So that's where you want to kind of put your handle. Whatever you do up here is all up to you. It's all cosmetic, okay? Pretty much anything but this is cosmetic. As long as the handle is here, you can put a giant balloon for all I care here, and you can put another balloon here. All that's going to show, you need to make sure you have right, is the handle. And that's all that matters, because if not, then it just looks weird and you're grabbing onto nothing. All right, so I'm going to go back into the other weapon. I'm actually going to turn this off by clicking on the little arrow button next to the longsword. This keeps the visibility on, but this keeps me unable to select it in the actual in the item selection, or in the object selection, or in the scene. Okay, so I'm just going to eyeball this quickly. I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to bring it down just a little bbit. I may want to scale it up just a little bit more, just to kind of reach that thickness. Try to get there as much as I can without being overly drastic on it. I'm going to pull it up and just kind of eyeball it. That looks about right for me. Now, like I said, you can grab the handle from here if you'd like, if you just wanted to have a long hilt. Up to you, or you can pull it here. Just like this. I think it's more realistic. I think this is where it's meant to be grabbed anyway. So it's going to be right there. Now this little bit is going to go a long way. It may not seem so right now, but it will. So we're going to fix that right now. As long as we have the handle correct, we're fine, okay? So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and click Control 1, and that's going to put us on the side view. Now if we did everything correctly, the weapon itself should have imported in center space. And yeah, 1 second, I'll be right back. Okay, everybody, I'm back. Sorry about that. I had to step away for a second to deal with something. I also had to turn up my video settings because I realized off my last video I was working with the low bit rate. So now as this second portion starts playing, you may notice an increase in video quality. So continuing on, I'm using my back view now, because as I stated before, weapons kind of use that right view for most of its modeling, and I'm just looking at it from the back view. Now if you imported it and you scaled it down from the actual object mode, it should have scaled to the center of the actual scene, which should have brought you within the center of the actual weapon, the old weapon itself. So the beauty of scaling object mode when it comes to weapons and other items that you import for most others. And when we get to that point, we'll get to that point. Now the reason why I'm also bringing it onto this axis is because I actually realized it's a little bit thinner. Now this is at your discretion if you like. For the sake of this tutorial and just showing you how I do this, I'm going to go ahead and hit S for scale, and I'm actually going to jump out of that. I'm going to hit tab because now I want to edit in edit mode. Now that I'm in edit mode, it'll edit within the actual sword itself, not within the actual scene. So if I hit S, it'll scale from the center of whatever is selected, in this case the entire sword. So it finds that happy medium in between. And it kind of scales from there, and that's what I want to do, because I don't want to take it in object mode and scale it, because it's going to scale to the actual center of the scene. Okay, which is not what I want to do. So like I said, hit tab to go into edit mode. Go ahead and click S for scale, and I'm going to scale it on the Y axis, I believe. Nope, wrong axis. On the X axis, I'm going to bring it in just to make it a little bit thicker to match the longsword in game, just for fairness. Okay, and now that I've done it on that axis, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit. It's hard to tell to see the weapon behind, but we're pretty much there. Now, if you want to make that thicker yourself, you can. Here's how. We're going to go ahead and click A to deselect everything, and click L. L is going to select by groups, okay? And when we come in here, we're going to find the area to select. Now, it's not selecting because we're on this mode. Now, if I went all the way to the very point of the weapon and click L, I'd probably find it. But because we're selecting by actual vertexes, and we have line here and we have faces. Now, if for any reason you're having trouble finding the point, the vertex, which is like the tips of the mesh, you can always go to face mode and then just hit L anywhere and you'll find a face there. There we go. Okay, so either way, I'm just going to stay in vertex mode. And then what I'm going to do for this now is I'm going to go ahead and pen, and let's see, we're on the blade, just want to make sure. Okay, hit Control 1 to go back into this view. I'm going to hit scale, and we're going to scale it on the X-axis as well. This is going to make it thicker, but if we notice one thing, it's coming out of the blade itself, which means it's not realistic, because the blade itself should be expanding with it. So how do we fix that? Let's go ahead and hit Control Z, undo, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on proportional editing, and I'm going to put connected. Now what that does, it means that things that are connected to whatever I'm selecting, the closer the connection to what I'm selecting, the more influence that I have whenever I'm moving something. And in order to see how much influence we have, we go ahead and hit scale, okay? And that's our influence. Now, if we move it and we scale it from there, it's going to select everything from within, all right? In this case, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and select Enable Proportional Editing. And what that does now is that when we hit scale, it scales everything within that sphere of influence in consideration to the entire mesh, okay? So, just like that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn down that influence. I'm turning at an angle here, so I want to see it move. And I'm going to hit S again. I'm going to bring that influence down by scrolling the middle mouse. If you followed the hair tutorial, you would understand this. You've done this with the hairs if you needed to exactly. And I'm going to hit scale, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom out, or I'm sorry, hit scale, hit X to stay on the X axis, and zoom a little bit, and see how the thickness is kind of bending with the sword, but it's not bending all the way down here. It's only touching whatever's closer based off that sphere of influence. Now, the sphere is up there because it's finding the center of the actual vertices that I selected, but it also it pertains to everything that I've selected. Now, if I were to turn that up and then scale on the X-axis, the more influence it would have on that bottom part, but because I kept it low, it kind of scaled it at an angle. So I'm going to hit that one. I'm going to hit Control 1, okay? I'm going to hit Z to go into wireframe mode, and if we look at the old weapon underneath, we're pretty near there. Now, it's up to you if you want to make it bigger. In this case, let's go ahead and do that just for the sake of making it thicker. So I'm going to hit S, I'm going to hit X again, but I'm also going to turn the influence back down because I don't want to influence that hilt anymore. Not as much, because I don't want to make it too thick. So I'm going to bring it to about the size of the sword. Go ahead and click, turn a little bit, hit Z to take it off wireframe mode. Go ahead and disable the background so I get a clean view of it. And this is what we're looking at right now. Now, some people may say that's a little too thick for a sword. Others may not. If we compare it to the older model, it does seem like it would be thick, but that's all up to you. It's up to you. It's all your call. So I'm going to hit Control 1, go back into ortho view. I'm actually going to undo what I just did. As long as you know how to do it, you're fine. Okay? So I'm going to bring it back just about right there. That's actually where I want it, because I felt like having it more than that's a little bit too thick. Actually, I'm just going to bring it inside just a little bit more altogether. Just about right there. Okay? It's still fairly within, so it looks like it's matching the old sword pretty good. Alright, I'm probably going to bring it up just a little bit, because I want the hand to, don't want it to be snug to the actual hilt here. I just want it kind of like right there. Alright, I'm going to hit 3 now to go back into right view. And I'm going to hit X, or Z, I'm sorry, to go into wireframe mode. And just like I did from that other viewpoint, I'm going to do the same to this one. So I'm going to hit this I'm going to hit A to deselect everything, click L to select the hilt, keep this mode on, proportionate scaling. I'm going to hit S to scale, but this time I'm going to scale on the Y axis, and then I'm going to thicken it just a little bit more. And as you can see down there on the bottom, it's thickening with it. Now, if I turn up that influence by hitting scale and Y to scale on the Y axis again, and turn up this influence, it's going to thicken even more. See how it moves? The less influence you want on pixels that are unselected. Okay, so in this case, what I want to do is I want to hit S. I'm going to hit Y to lock it on the Y axis. I'm going to turn down this influence just a little bit because I don't want to make that hilt too big. I just want it to come out just enough to adhere to the sword itself. About right there. It doesn't have to always fit the Neverwinter Nights 2 vanilla model, just as long as it's within the same ballpark. Press A to deselect everything, press A again to select everything, and I'm going to bring it up just a little bit more. Okay. And I'm going to hit Z to go into object mode, turn off the background so I can get another view at it. And this is what we're looking at right now for our sword. Okay, hit Control 1 to go back into ortho view, looks good. Hit 3 to go into right view, looks good. Now we're going to turn on the vanilla armor, the vanilla weapon, and we're going to hit Z to go into wireframe so we can see behind it. I'm going to bring this down to meet the tip of the sword. Now, how long you want this is up to you, but that goes a long way. Keep in mind that this sword is almost as big, about half the size of a human model. So this little bit's like going from a foot to a kneecap. Now, if you're creating a claymore, that's fine and understandable. But if you're just creating a regular long sword, you may want to shrink that down. And we're going to do that the same way like we just did right now with the hilt part, okay? So to do that, we're going to go into edit mode again, and we're going to hit Control. Hold down Control and then use your left click to create a circle just like this. Now, whatever you select within that, whatever you touch within that circle is selected. So in this case, as you can see, we have vertices up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All these little ones are here, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to select those vertices by hitting Control, left click, make a circle around it, and select them, okay? Now, we can simply just move those down just as is if we'd like, or if you want to move it all together as a mesh, you can also turn up your sphere of influence. But this time we're not going to hit scale, we're going to hit grab, okay? And we're going to grab it and move it down. But look what happens if we don't adhere to an actual a locked-in axis. So we're going to go like that. We're going to zoom in, hit grab, turn up your sphere of influence just about right there. Okay, go ahead and click escape just to make sure. Whenever you touch a sphere of influence or you make it bigger or smaller, always hit escape because you want it. Because sometimes you might accidentally move it as you're moving the circle, and then you locked it in by accident. So go ahead and press S. Bring your sphere of influence to about a desired size. I'd say right there. Okay, hit escape. Even though you escaped, the sphere of influence is now saved. Press G, or if you want, just grab it on the Z axis here and grab and bring it down a little bit, okay? And let's go ahead and meet it to the tip. Tip to tip, there we go. All right, let's go ahead and turn that off, the old vanilla file, and let's go ahead and press Z to go into object mode, and let's look at our sword. Okay, now there we go. There's our sword. Looking good. Okay, that's pretty much done. Hit A, deselect everything, Control 1, view it from the side, and number pad 3, view it from that angle. Okay, next what we do, you want to check the UV maps. Now, the UVs more likely are set if you downloaded the object from somewhere where you know where you got it from, chances are the UVs are set. If you're creating this from scratch, chances are you don't even need this tutorial to know about UVs and how it works, because chances are you've already done your own UV mapping and textures. But in this case, we're going to assume that you bought the model from Sketchfab, 3D Ocean, or any other 3D site, or just got it from a friend, or ripped it from another game, or wherever it may be, fell from the sky, whatever floats your boat there. But I'm just going to press A, go to select all. Okay, I'm going to go up here to my screen layout. I'm going to hit UV editing. Okay, now as this is selected here, we have the UVs here, so I'm going to select A for all the UVs here, select A that are here, and I notice now that it's not linked to a file, so I'm going to hit open. And most times, if the texture the material has the texture linked to it within the actual OBJ itself, it'll automatically find it. But in this case, it did not. So we're just going to go through. I'm going to go back to where the sword tutorial is, and I'm going to go to model sword, and here's the textures. Now, I believe the texture we're looking for is the albedo, but normally what we do within Photoshop is we mix and match these using I go ahead and mix and match them using the blending filters to go ahead and create a very realistic sword, because this is pretty much each one of these is its own texture / material, but we're not using materials, we're not using Blender cycles or anything like that. That may not make sense unless you're a little more advanced in materials and textures. But we're going to click albedo, okay? Now, from what I saw, albedo is pretty dark, but that's how this sword is. We'll edit that in Photoshop to bring it up using the other textures. But for now, we just want to assign it a UV map. Now, the texture itself was already set for this, so as you can see, it already knows where to place itself. I'm going to go back into default. I'm going to hit A. I'm going to go ahead and hit texture here. Now, it's hard to see because I have my lamps in the area, but my lamps are really made for more fitted for larger models, more precisely armor models and stand-up models than something as like a sword. And besides, this albedo is actually is really dark, this albedo file, this texture, so it's meant to be like that. All right, so I hit 3 and we'll bring that down there. Now you really can't tell here, but you can see on the hilt maybe the light shows a little bit more, but that's pretty much what our sword is. And if we look at that, it's pretty sharp actually. That's really good. We'll turn that up in Photoshop. To turn that up, we'll do that towards the end, okay? Right now we want to focus on just getting the sword out. So what we're going to do now is just like we do with the helmet and the hair, is we go and check the original sword file to see what we need from that. That way we may apply it to what we have here, okay? And then we're going to steal the name and get rid of it. So I'm going to turn off the new one. I'm going to look at the old one. And as I stated before, there are the 4 checks you want to make when exporting anything. You want to check your modifiers, you want to check your mesh, you want to check your materials, and you want to check your textures. The textures apply to the materials, that apply to the mesh, that apply to the modifier. So these 4 need to go in order. Usually I go from left to right, but you can just do them however you want, whatever makes your workflow better. Okay, so in this case, the original sword, it looks like it has no modifier. It's a good thing, which means it's not tied to any armature. You don't have to worry about that. One less step for us to take care of. Okay. For the longsword, we do look at the mesh. The mesh just has to match the object. Okay, remember that mesh has to the mesh name has to match the object name. And also, you should have UV map here. It's just letting you know that we have a UV map for it, which is obviously what we did before when we went to UV editing and saw that map there. We've assigned it, and so we're good to go. Okay, and then we're going to go into materials. This is the materials that it usually used, that it used actually from the vanilla file. That's irrelevant to us. That's not important to us. Materials and textures, that's more important to when we export, okay? So there's really the only thing we need to check in the vanilla file is if it had weights, UV vertex groups, which it doesn't, and if it had modifiers, in which it doesn't. So in that case, what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and steal the name itself, because I'm going to override it as the longsword 01 model. So I'm going to double select it, hit Control A to copy it. Hit Control A to select all, Control C to copy it. I'm going to click off it. I'm going to delete it now. I no longer need it. I just need the name. I'm going to turn this one back on. I'm going to hit Control V to paste it. Now this is the new longsword 01 model. Okay, because we're going to overwrite it now. Now, if we want to, as I said, we went to the longsword 01 model because we want to replicate its properties to this one. If we remember correctly, its properties showed that it had no modifiers, so we'll leave that alone. Its properties also showed that the name itself must match the mesh, or else it won't be able to find it. Now, if you notice, we have a .001 when I pasted it in. It's because it still remembers, though we deleted it from the object, there's already a mesh called longsword_A. And that's the one that we deleted. So we have to copy again right over it, and it reassigns, it flips them. So now that old one is 001, and this one's the actual legit _A with no .001. Okay, so I'll undo that so you can see what I meant. When I first pasted the name over the mesh, it named it as an instance 1, when in fact it should be the regular one. The reason why it named it instance 1 is because the first one, the first mesh from the vanilla longsword was taking that name. Now when I copy it over again, it gives this one the real name, and that first vanilla model now has the 001 instance. Okay, same thing will happen for the material. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, 001, Control V once again. Now it's overridden as the primary. Okay, Textures, don't worry about. We don't need to do textures because textures will apply in the MDB cloner. I tend not to do textures in Blender because sometimes it doesn't work out properly because you have to do all this little editing here within the actual texture, and that's a whole thing in itself. I trust the MDB cloner to take care of that for me. Now that we've done that, we can turn these back on, just leave them there. Like I said, those are more of data files. And we're ready to export this sword. That's all it needs. You pretty much just made a sword model and we're ready to export it out under this name. So I'm going to double click that again, hit Control C. I'm going to go to File. I'm going to export Neverwinter II. I'm going to select Smooth TS Seams and do an alpha test on it. Okay. I'm going to go back into the sword tutorial. I'm not going to override my original swords. I'd rather just put it in this folder here. Hit Control V. Okay, because I copied the sword name, or you can just type in W_long uppercase L sword 01_A and hit export to Neverwinter II. Now, if you've noticed, I don't export my parts separately. That's just one thing I don't do. I find that you'll reach more clipping errors and more errors, and it's just more time consuming for me to separate the parts simply because I do a lot of batch processing. I don't have time to do one at a time. Call me lazy or just call me I don't care. I tend not to do that. I'd rather just get one sword out and just leave it as is. Customization for doing a hilt to a sword is not really that much of an importance to me. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and drop this down. I'm gonna go ahead and find that file I exported. Okay, longsword 01. I'm gonna go ahead and open my override folder for the video game. So I'm gonna open up a override. Okay, I have it here. As you know, I've done faces, I've done hairs, and I've done helmets. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do test sword. Okay, I'm going to open that up. I'm going to copy this into here by holding the right click. Copy here. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine these four textures together. As you know, we use the albedo. That's what we're using right now. But I'm going to do this in Photoshop quickly to combine these textures together and to create a texture for this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. I'm using CS6 because it actually exports to DDS. I understand CC 2020 does it now too, but you need to download those advanced tools to do that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop the albedo in here. That's what we're originally using. It's going to open up. And I'm going to simply copy over the gloss. Press enter. I'm going to copy over the specular. Press enter. And I'm going to copy over the normal. Now, some people don't tend to. This is just my technique. It works for me. It adds a effect of realism to the weapon itself. I'm going to control all of these. I'm going to rasterize these 3 layers from Smart Objects. Now, if you don't understand what I'm doing here, that's fine. For those who do work Photoshop, I don't know if this will help. I just rather show my entire process rather than just say, hey, well, here's the texture I redid and you have no idea how I did it. So I'm just going to double click this, go into here. I'm going to find a way to kind of get it integrated with the albedo underneath. So as you can see, when I go under color dodge, it starts giving me these other effects. I'm going to put this under hard light, and that's going to separate contrast the darks from the brights. I'm going to turn this layer back on, the specular. I'm going to do the same thing, hard light. And it kind of adds more stony effect. Now, if you double click and go into here and you start messing around, you can probably get some other effects that you might want. Let's go with the color dodge. It looks like it's giving me a more grunge effect. Maybe turn it down a little bit. About right there. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my normal map. Now, as you can see, a normal map really adds a lot of cracks and creases within the weapon. Normally, this is important by itself, obviously, just to be the normal map. I tend to integrate it into my diffuse texture simply because I enjoy taking the 3D depth from the actual normal map and applying it to the diffuse to create an even more realistic effect. So what I do here is I hit Control-Shift-U to desaturate the entire map. I'll hit Control-L to open up levels, and then I'll go ahead and bring the levels in, just kind of smash them together, and that'll kind of give me this really contrasted detail within the map itself. As you can see, look at this, the rope down here, and look at the cracks. Press OK. Then I'm going to put that over map on overlay. And as you can see, some of these now have these little, you can see the little curves and creases in between. And normally you can get that effect with the engine itself when it uses when it uses the normal map to create the lighting. But Neverwinter Nights 2 is an older game, and I tend to just use it as a boost because hey, why not, right? Give the older game some help and let the engine kind of get that extra bump. All right, so I'm gonna hit Control E after I select all the files to merge them all together. Okay, I'm gonna go back into this mode, and then I'm gonna hit, what do we save as? Where's the JPEG? Now, one thing we have to do is we have to convert this JPEG over as a target file or a DDS. I tend to use DDS whenever available because it gives better compression and it takes less strain off your hard drive. So I'm gonna hit Control Shift S, all right, and I'm gonna drop this down to DDS, and I'm actually gonna change the name in whole because I'm gonna reassign it. So I'm gonna call it Lazy Sword 01 _D to state that it's a diffuse map. I'm gonna press save. I'm going to save it as a DXT1 with no alpha because there's no alpha information in this map, okay? Save it off and let that save. Depending on how big the file is, the longer the save takes. The reason why the save takes a little bit longer is simply because it's compressing all of this data into the best compression it can give. But generally, because this is a very big map, based off the timing of that save, I assume this is a 2K map. Weapons don't really need to be 2K. Actually, it's a 3K. So we can turn that down to, I want to turn that down to just, well, let's turn it down to a 124 because a weapon doesn't need to be that polished. That should work. But for the sake of just showing the quality, I'm going to undo that. Okay, I'm just going to turn it down to 2048. All right, and then I'm going to resave it out again. Hit Control S, it remembers your settings as DDS, DXT1, RGB, 4 bits, 4 BPP, no alpha, save, and it should save a lot faster than the usual. Now, if you save it as a 4K, it takes a long time. When I say long, I'm over exaggerating the word, but long in terms of how long a DDS should take to save. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. I'm going to open up the normal map by itself now. Okay, now the normal map must always have a specular map attached, a specularity attached in its alpha channel. In this case, it does not. Most do not because obviously all the textures were separated. So we're going to simply create a new channel. It'll automatically create the alpha one. Okay, now one thing that we can't do is we can't just drag and drop our specular map into it because nothing shows. It doesn't allow you to do that. So what we have to do here is we have to separately open up the specularity map in Photoshop, okay? Hit Control A, Control C to select all and copy. Go into the alpha channel, hit Control V, and it should fit it within the actual map itself. If it doesn't, just scale it down to fit, and you should be good to go. Now I'm going to do my own little method. I'm going to crunch down this brightness and contrast because I want it to really have these cracks of shine. Just kind of experiment here. There we go. So the sword will really shine and these little cracks here will shine, but really rustic and dull in between, okay? So kind of like that. I'm gonna hit that. I'm gonna go back to the RGB. I'm gonna go ahead and Control Shift S to save. I'm gonna save this as a DDS2 and I'm gonna save it as, oops, shift here, Lazy Sword 01 _in for normal map with alpha channels. Click save. And this time I'm going to change it to DXT5. And those who have watched my other tutorials, whenever doing normal maps, you always save a normal map as DXT5 minimum. Save. Okay. And go ahead and let that save. Now I understand this is going to be a bigger save too because it's using that same 3K map size. I'm going to shrink it back down to 2K. Now this is just for presentation. Normally you don't want weapon models being that big because weapons are really a small model and they're not really used as much. It just takes up a lot of space for no reason. Generally, weapon models are 1K at the max, but usually 512 or even 256 resolution. So, not resolution, 256 pixels. So, I'm going to turn that down to 2048 and just resave it now. As that, yes. Press OK. DXT5 save. And as that's saving, I'm going to get ready to transport these files. So When this little spinner stops spinning, we know that it's saved, and this temp file will erase, and there we go. So I already moved the MDB over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click both of these. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to put copy here. And within the actual cloner itself, okay, I'm going to go to MDB cloner. I'm going to find that file, and I'm going to link those two files to the MDB. So load, and I'm going to go to override, test sword, longsword, and as you can see, we didn't assign textures to it in Blender, so it says unknown. We're going to click this little button right here, and we're going to click DDS files, and as long as they're within the same directory, it'll open from that directory. If not, you'd have to go and find them. Okay, lazy sword D for the diffuse map. For the normal map, we're going to click the same thing, drop down DDS files, lazy sword 01 in, save clone. It's going to prompt saying, do you wish to overwrite this clone or this MDB? You click yes, and it overrid it. If we're satisfied with it, we'll go ahead and clone it out to a different slot number, one that's more readily available, so that way we're not actually overwriting the longsword 01 unless that is your intent. Okay, so now to test this item, I'm going to go ahead and fire up the map editor. Okay, now I believe I've done everything correctly, so it should show up in the map editor. If we run into problems, we'll fix it there. But if all looks well, we should end this tutorial and you should be good to go. The map editor takes a second to load, as you all know. Not the funnest thing. Hopefully when I get the CapStation software, you'll see a better presentation of video quality. I'm going to go ahead and go to new area. Area 1's fine, exterior doesn't matter. Actually, I don't think any of that matters. I have to even do that because it's not a creature, it's an item. So I'm going to click longsword. Okay. Let's just go with an adamantine. Why not? Let's go and copy that blueprint to the module and edit that blueprint. Okay. And I'm going to go into the preview first and see that it's got its own. I swear this thing's tricky. Okay. That's the model that it's looking at right now. I don't know how to work this thing properly. There we go. Okay. And so now that that's done, what we're going to do now is I'm going to go to properties. I'm going to change that model part 1 because this is model part A underscore B underscore C, which means I can put these on 0 but I don't need them. Okay, I can put this on 0, and if you want to go and preview it, it's just this and this. B and C are using scale 0 because I put everything together on A. So I'm going to hit 1, and there's our sword. Okay. There is our sword. Now, the reason why it's dark is just because of lighting. I don't want to actually put it in game and then have to go into the game and show you and stuff like that, just because you can do it on your own. But pretty much, there we go. We imported a sword from an OBJ file. We redid the textures, we resized it, and here on out, if you want to go back into that file and go ahead and edit it out and edit whatever you like, that's at your own discretion. Okay, and you should be good to go. So there's your first longsword import. The same applies to almost any other weapon. If you see an axe you want to import, just go ahead and pull the vanilla file in like I did and kind of reference your new model off of it. Export it using the same method where you just grab those original files or kind of grab the same properties the original had, apply them to your new sword, overwrite it, and export it into Neverwinter Nights 2. Hopefully this tutorial was easy to follow, and hopefully it wasn't dragging on too long with unnecessary banter. Hopefully it got the point across, and it was able to teach you a thing or two. Understandably, you may have to go through it a time or two, but I guarantee once you learn it, you can probably do a weapon import if you have all your files already set in about a minute and a half. I've done some where I've done like 10 staffs in a matter of 15 minutes. It's not hard at all once you start getting your batch processing done and stuff like that. The more experience you get with the interface, the more faster everything turns out overall. Okay, everybody, so there's your tutorial, and until next time, take it easy.